With 52 cards and 10 possible groups of hands available, you're probably thinking that poker is just purely a game of bluffing and body language. Except, not only is there a way to calculate your chances of winning, but also methods to sway the game in your favour, as it is not only your cards that you should pay attention to, but also the chances of your opponents having winning cards. In this video, we'll look at how you can calculate the probability of winning each round at the very table, as well as the psychology of bluffing and overall tactics on how to win. Firstly, probabilities. We'll be looking at Texas Hold'em poker, and in any hand of poker, you can always have a general idea of your chance of winning. So, here's how. Firstly, looking at your cards, which can be any sort, but even if you don't have a double ace, a bet would be wise to put yourself in the game. Once the flop has been played, now it is time to start thinking. Knowing the 5 cards in front of you, it's time to work out the possibilities of the highest possible hand you can attain, as there are 4 main scenarios. Scenario 1 is where you can already make a good hand based on your current cards. Let's say something like a 3 of a kind, so betting in would make sense. Of course, you don't want to make it too obvious by going all in or betting too much, but we'll get to that skill soon. Scenario 2 would be that your current position has potential to become something after the turn and river have been played, most likely being a flush or a straight, but now the probabilities come into play. In this situation, let's take a potential flush. There are 13 cards of each suit, and currently there are 13 minus the current number of spades left in play. That we know of course, as other players may have spades. So, we can say there are likely 6 or so spades available to complete that flush, which means this can occur in the next 2 plays with a likely probability. If we take something like a straight, the probabilities are much lower, as there are only 4 of the same number of each card, so if it hasn't already come up in the flop, you're pushing your chances. These being examples, the main principle is that after any flop, determine whether there are a decent number of cards in the deck that could complete your hand to be as high as possible. But there's a layer within a layer, so to speak, with this. What if your opponent has a higher possible hand? Scan the current cards on the table and formulate what else could come into play, perhaps a higher flush or a full house. So, after you've roughly determined that your probabilities, also consider your opponent's possibilities. As a result, you can make an informed decision on whether your opponents have wildly better chances than you, or if it's relatively even. Which brings us to scenario 3. Based on the flop and your hand, you have few and poor options to form a viable hand. So, if the opponents have much better probabilities, you can either bluff your way out of a tight corner, or play it safe and fold. Bluffing is easier said than done, and is very useful for scenario 4. Based on your hand and the current flop, no patterns have emerged, so a pair or double pair is likely to be a higher hand. In this situation, you can take the major risk, betting low in hope that everyone takes it. But if a major part of this is bluffing, how do you detect a bluff? Before you even play a hand against an opponent, pay close attention to his tendencies. You must try to figure out if bluffing is something that's part of his arsenal. Being a poker player is much like being a criminal profiler. Before you make a decision on how to play your hand, try to classify your opponent in terms of their bluffing tendencies. The most dramatic way to spot a bluff is to look your opponent in the eye and attempt to sense his fear. If he looks nervous, it could be a sign that he's bluffing. The best method to detect an opponent's physical tells is simply looking for anything unusual or uncharacteristic in his behaviour. For example, if your opponent bets and then suddenly puts his hand over his mouth, that could be a sign that he's bluffing. When a player is losing, he's more likely to steam or go on tilt. He may become impatient and bluff more than usual. If you think he's steaming, be on the lookout for this type of erratic play. Keep this in mind that some players bluff for the opposite reason. They bluff because they're bored. Winning players, flush with confidence, often try to add deception to the game with a well-timed bluff. And lastly, how to detect a bluff is with strange betting patterns. This is probably the best and most accurate way to sniff out a bluff. You really need to pay attention to the way your opponent played his hands in the past in order to make educated decisions in the present. Trying to spot his betting patterns. If you can, it will be easy to recognize bets that don't seem to make much sense. For example, let's say that you've picked up the following pattern. When your opponent makes a flush on the turn, they always slow play the hand, hoping you'll bet so that they can check or raise. This can also mean over or under betting when attempting to bluff, but this always seems pretty obvious to catch. Given that you are now a poker professional, a like and subscribe would make a great donation to this channel.